Only the very best drivers in the world make it to Formula One. But even these elite racers are not above making the odd, silly mistake when at the wheel. Seven-time world champion Michael Schumacher proved that even the best of the best can make mistakes sometimes when he was involved in a crash at the 2005 Chinese Grand Prix before the race had even begun. Some half an hour before lights out, Schumacher was driving his Ferrari around to his grid slot at a leisurely pace, apparently unaware that rookie Christian Albers was approaching at speed. Schumacher pulled left, right into the path of the Minardi.
I am damaged the car. Do I need to come back to the pits for T-car?
Luckily, neither of them were hurt, and the accident happened in time for both drivers to swap into their spare cars before the race started. But it proved that even the greatest champions aren't infallible. Pedro de la Rosa was a fine driver for Arrows, Jaguar, Sauber and McLaren. As both a race and test driver, the Spaniard had completed thousands of miles behind the wheel of a Formula One car, which makes his lapse in concentration at the 2012 European Grand Prix all the more surprising. In second practice, he was approaching turn 14 on the Valencia track, when, distracted by his radio, he understeered off the track at the right-hander and ploughed straight into the barrier.
Okay, Pedro, the next car to you is Rosberg, who's just exit of the last corner now.
Okay, one lap, and then I think again.
Okay, mate.
I fast crash. Sorry, guys. Stop.
Okay, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Oh, what a mistake. I will never forget this mistake. It's my first ever proper mistake of lack of concentration. There's no excuses whatsoever.
He may have been a little red-faced when he returned to the garage to face his HRT mechanics, but he didn't let it slow him down, beating his teammate Narain Karthikeyan both in qualifying and the race. Ivan Capelli's Grand Prix career began in 1985 and saw him compete in 98 races for 6 teams, scoring 3 podiums along the way. While those 3 champagne moments may be red-letter days in the Capelli household, it's unlikely he will ever forget what happened to him at the 1992 Monaco Grand Prix. The Italian had secured a dream drive with Ferrari for that year, but it soon turned into a nightmare as he struggled with the temperamental car. But while running 5th in Monte Carlo, he seemed to be getting to grips with it. That was until he reached Le Rascasse. Upon braking, Capelli lost the rear, the car going into a spin within the narrow walls. Somehow, his Ferrari ended up wedged into a barrier in mid-air at a 45-degree angle, looking back the way it had come.
From the onboard camera, Capelli somehow, and he got it crossed up here, he's hit that, no, missed that one. And an accident in slow motion for you. It's parked quite neatly up there.
6 more DNFs followed in the next 8 Grand Prix, and with 2 races to go, Capelli was sacked. But at least he could say he'd gone up in the world that day in Monaco. David Coulthard was in his first full season of Formula One in 1995 and was looking for a first win for the front-running Williams team. At the Italian Grand Prix, everything was going right. He took pole position by half a second ahead of Michael Schumacher in the Benetton, and on race day, Coulthard led the field away for the formation lap. But that's when disaster struck. 3/4 of the way around the track, as Coulthard hit the throttle to accelerate out of the Ascari chicane, he spun off.
This is quite incredible. David Coulthard, for whatever reason, has blown his chances of winning the Italian Grand Prix before it even starts.
He later said he'd slid on a patch of oil, but whatever the cause, he'd thrown away his big chance of taking that maiden win in the most embarrassing of circumstances, or had he? He managed to get going again and limped back to the pits. But when the race was red flagged after carnage on lap 1, It allowed Coulthard to retake the pole position slot in the spare car. This time he led the field around the formation lap without incident and kept the lead for 13 laps. Though it soon became clear this just wasn't to be Coulthard's day, and he spun out again due to a wheel bearing failure.
Oh, this is not going to be a race that David Coulthard will want to be remembering.
There was a time when the purpose of a Formula One car's steering wheel was simply to steer. But these days, it's the control interface for every function on the car, with buttons, dials and switches galore to adjust everything from brake balance to engine modes and everything in between. It's no wonder these super complex computers can sometimes get a little much for the drivers, as Pastor Maldonado found in first practice for the 2014 Chinese Grand Prix. The Lotus driver got distracted while changing settings and suddenly realised he'd wandered off the track and was heading for the barrier, before lurching back onto the circuit and spinning through 180 degrees.
Yeah, a bit embarrassing. I think he's not going to be looking down his steering wheel during the corners anymore, is he?
Things got worse in second practice when he misjudged his braking point for the pit entry, came in too fast and slammed into the barrier. A day to forget for the Venezuelan. Maldonado is far from the only driver to have suffered an embarrassing crash at the pit lane entry. And in 1995, it happened to David Coulthard while he was leading a race. The Scottish driver was driving in his last race for Williams before a switch to McLaren and wanted to go out with a bang. He qualified second on the grid, but jumped teammate Damon Hill at the start to take the lead. It was a brilliant start by DC, who looked in prime position to take his second career victory, until he peeled off the track for his first stop.
Oh, my goodness! David Coulthard smashes himself out of the Australian. I have never seen that before. He comes into the pit lane and into the wall.
I mean, that will be so embarrassing for him.
Well, embarrassing is one word, mortifying is another. A terrible way to finish his Williams career.
His hopes of victory were dashed and his race was over, all thanks to a momentary lapse in concentration. Nigel Mansell was having a dream race at the 1989 Portuguese Grand Prix at Estoril. Having started third, the Englishman, then racing for Ferrari, managed to pass both Ayrton Senna and Gerhard Berger ahead of him, to take the lead of the race in typically aggressive style. So far, so good. But it all went wrong when he came into the pits.
Mansell coming into the pits now, the leader coming into the pits, coming storming in very quickly, clipping those curbs. He's really rushing into the pits. Past the McLaren mechanics. Oh, and he locks up his front wheels. He almost runs down the Ferrari mechanics. That's gone all wrong. The mechanics will have to pull him back. But in fact, no, Mansell is reversing back to his pit.
Unfortunately for Mansell, reversing in the pit lane is strictly forbidden on safety grounds, and he was soon shown the black disqualification flag. But apparently not having seen it, he pressed on and caused a huge controversy as he tried to repass race leader Senna.
You saw the black flag being waved, but Mansell's going through. Nigel Mansell goes through to second place and Senna moves across him and they collide. Mansell was going for second place, Senna went across to take his line, and the two of them are out.
I did not see any flag. I was competing for second place. It's as simple as that. If they believe honestly I saw it and ignored it, I will have to consider retiring sooner rather than later from Formula One.
Not Nigel's best day at the office. Crashing an F1 car while right on the edge of grip and performance is one thing, but crashing when running slowly behind the safety car is a nightmare scenario for any F1 driver. But that's exactly what happened to Romain Grosjean at the 2018 Azerbaijan Grand Prix. The Frenchman was running in an excellent 6th place behind the safety car, which was triggered after Red Bull teammates Max Verstappen and Daniel Ricciardo dramatically collided. But while weaving to warm his tyres, Grosjean lost control and slammed into the wall.
Oh, someone's crashed under the safety car.
It's the Haas. It's the Haas, and we're just looking at the moment to see who it is,
Grosjean.
And it is Grosjean.
No! What happened?
I think Ericsson hit us.
Replays of the crash showed Sauber's Marcus Ericsson was nowhere near Grosjean at the time, and he had in fact just lost the car all by himself.
I want to apologize to the team. We were doing an amazing race, starting last, running P6. It's very painful for all of us.
Thankfully, Grosjean was later able to see the funny side.
I can't believe that ended up in my mouth. Poor Marcus, I'm very sorry. It wasn't me. I promise it wasn't me. Was it you?
Some of the mistakes we've seen so far ended up costing race wins. But in 1999, Mika Häkkinen made 2 unforced errors that almost cost him a world championship. And they both happened on Italian soil. At May's San Marino Grand Prix, Häkkinen had qualified on pole at Imola and was leading comfortably when on lap 17, this happened.
Off goes Mika Häkkinen! Off goes Mika Häkkinen out of the race! Mika Häkkinen, the race leader, loses the McLaren and slam bang into the wall!
It was weird. I mean, it happened very fast.
4 months later, Formula One returned to Italy, this time for the Italian Grand Prix itself at Monza, with Häkkinen heading into the weekend a single point ahead of Ferrari's Eddie Irvine at the top of the championship. Häkkinen was very much in enemy territory, but he again led away from pole and settled into a comfortable lead until lap 30, when he selected the wrong gear.
Häkkinen, the race leader! He's out of the race! He's out of the race! Mika Häkkinen retires on lap 30, and this could blow the World Championship wide open. And Mika Häkkinen, after the misery of Belgium, is consumed with rage, and the Tifosi are consumed with delight.
But there was a happy ending, as the Finn shrugged off his Monza disappointment to win the championship with victory in the final race of the year in Japan. Perhaps the most famous unforced error in Formula One history was made by one of the sport's most celebrated drivers, and on the biggest stage of all, at the Monaco Grand Prix. Ayrton Senna was a master at Monaco, taking a record 6 wins in the Principality. His dominance of the track was such that between 1987 and 1993, he won every single race there, bar one. And he would have won that too, had it not been for an uncharacteristic lapse from the great Brazilian. Even by Senna's standards, he was on top form from the very beginning of the 1988 race weekend, dominating every practice session and then taking pole by an unbelievable 1.4 seconds from his McLaren teammate Alain Prost, himself no slouch around Monte Carlo. On race day, Senna was in a class of his own and was comfortably leading by some 50 seconds as the race entered its final stages. McLaren boss Ron Dennis got on the radio to tell him to slow down and ensure a safe 1-2 finish for the team. But just moments later, the unthinkable happened.
And that is Senna! Sensation! On lap 67, Ayrton Senna goes out of the lead of the Monaco Grand Prix at the Portier. For the second time this year, Brazilian Ayrton Senna is out of a race.
Senna was so furious with himself, he climbed out of his car and rather than return to the pits, simply walked back to his Monaco apartment, refusing to see or speak to anyone until he reappeared in the McLaren garage later that night. It proved even the very best drivers in the world can make mistakes, part of the unpredictability that makes Formula One the most exciting sport on the planet.